on my attention. My countrymen, they love their fiction. The words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 1 of 200. We are back for a midweek episode following the current events weekend cast. I promised that we were going to have an independent cast about the ICJ ruling, the provisional opinion regarding the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territories. There's so much to get into here. It's a big document. There's a lot that we want to cover. I'm joined by two fantastic guests. We have resident genocide researcher Kieran Kelly. Welcome.
Kieran.
And we've got, what do you call yourself these days, Jeremy? Jeremy Rose.
Freelance journalist, yeah.
Freelance journalist, Jeremy Rose. And Kieran, if you want to just give the audience a little bit of a rundown. It's been a few months since we've had you on the podcast. So where do you come from? What do you do?
Right. Well, I studied a bit of history, a little bit of genocide and stuff like that. Currently, what I'm doing is writing a very long, involved piece about why I hate the ICC, and everyone else should as well. So it kind of sort of dovetails with this a wee bit. That will eventually be finished.
And Jeremy, freelance journalist. Where have you been? What are you doing today?
My interest in Israel goes back to when I was a kid, but Mum was born in Vienna in 1937, Jewish. They escaped to New Zealand in 1939. In 1984, as an 18-year-old, I went to Israel, lived on a kibbutz, and while I was there, I spent quite a lot of time in the occupied territories. It was very easy in those days. You could catch Palestinian-owned buses. I was in Jericho on what's called Land Day. Land Day is a day of protest that marks the killing of Palestinians within Israel. I forget the year. But that's what kind of woke me up to the reality of occupation. I was sitting in a greengrocer watching some kids play. There was an army jeep with a mounted gun on the front, and they playfully followed these kids. The family ended up inviting me back to their house, me and a friend I was traveling with, and they told me they would love me to meet their son, but he was in prison. So he was the same age as me, 18. And that kind of woke me up to the realities. I also went to Gaza. It's another kind of involved story, but so I got a glimpse of what that was like. In those days, you could catch a taxi from Tel Aviv, which is what I did. I wasn't paying. So you can tell that it was a very, very different time, an incredibly grim time, but compared to now, nothing at all. I mean, it was easy to have hope. When I came back to New Zealand, I trained as a journalist and spent most of my working life working as a journalist. And I haven't written or touched on Israel that often. The first time I remember writing about it was after Israel bombed a refugee camp in Lebanon, 1994, I think. And I was supposed to be reviewing some Israeli films from a film festival, an Israeli-sponsored film festival. So instead of reviewing the films, I just said, look, I haven't got the stomach to support a film festival from a country that bombs refugee camps. And I got called a book burner by David Swartz from the Zionist Council. He sent a letter in. And I won't go into the history. So there's been a few things like that, but I haven't written a lot. But I've remained passionately interested. I have distant relatives in Israel. I've got friends in Israel. And I, like most Jewish people, am concerned about anti-Semitism, but believe it's been weaponized in a very, very dangerous way. Yeah, so that's basically me.
And you have written something just recently as well in the Pacific Journalism Review.
That's right. I wrote about the war on journalism and the Israeli targeting, and I think it's fairly definite that is what's happening, of journalists and journalist families, which is unprecedented. There's never been anything like it.
It's horrific. But today we're here to talk about the ICJ ruling. Kieran, do you want to give us a quick, definition of the ICJ versus the ICC?
Oh, right, yeah. So, the ICJ's been around longer. It's part of the UN. So it is kind of in a way the highest court in the world. So it rules on state disputes. So disputes between states, it's not a criminal court. It doesn't deal with any of that. The ICC evolved out of the ad hoc criminal tribunals that they had one for the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, then one for Rwanda. And people thought, well, this seems a little bit, maybe even a bit political to be having these ad hoc tribunals. We should have a permanent one. So they built something way more political than that. And, and it is, sometimes called the International Caucasian Court. It's also called the Imperialist Criminal Court. It's largely been concerned with prosecuting Africans. It really is only a tool against the powerless or the weak by nature. Also, being a criminal court, it's trying to solve serious, large-scale issues by plucking out one person and saying you're the bad guy. And it tends to play into our beliefs that we get from all the propaganda and the what I call the prosecutoganda as well. Where like somehow like once the judge's gavel falls and someone sent to jail, the credits roll and everything's all right. Whereas, of course, locking someone in prison might serve some purposes, but it definitely does not bring anyone back to life or fix any of the problems. And so it's a very different beast. The ICJ, of course, like neither of these courts have any police. They rely on others to do what they say. The ICJ, of course, is offering, advising states to do things. The UN Security Council can enforce ICJ rulings, but obviously can take away the veto power of the permanent members of the UN Security Council. So there is a political element to that as well. However, of course, when it says that the law says such and such, it carries a lot of weight. And I think that people are starting to understand that the ICJ is a potential tool. An ICJ ruling isn't like something that will fix things, but it is something that activists and bureaucrats and well-meaning parties, that could even be state parties, can use as a way of saying we have the authoritative and thorough ruling on this sort of thing. So that's the ICJ.
Fantastic. And you were saying before the cast, there is sometimes conflation of the two. This hasn't been helped on this recent opinion by the ICC, currently working through a set of warrants for Israeli politicians. I think just Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense.
And the Hamas ones too.
Yes, alongside the Hamas leaders. But they are two different jurisdictions. They're two different sets of court procedures. And we are dealing with the ICJ today. So rulings about the behavior of states and international law, but not trying to arrest any individuals.
I think it's worth remembering that in 2017, New Zealand put up a draft proposal to the Security Council. We were on it at that time. And in the draft proposal, it said that Israel should agree to stop building any illegal settlements, and the Palestinians should agree not to take Israel to the International Court of Justice. Now, luckily, that never got put, and New Zealand ended up putting resolution that the Palestinians themselves had written, 2334, which claimed that, in fact, it's the highest lawmaking court in the world, and it declared the settlements a flagrant violation of international law. And that was passed because Obama was pissed off with Netanyahu, and so he abstained.
Yeah. some really important context for some of the things we're going to be talking about as well in regards to this advisory opinion. Came in on the 19th of July. Something I think that hasn't been covered quite as much is that this is from 2022. That's when this was originally brought before the court. And as such, by the time they were working through this ruling, I guess they made the decision that they weren't going to include any of the actions post October 7th, 2023. The reason for that is they have chosen to define, so the title of the opinion is Legal Consequences Arising from the Policies and Practices of Israel and the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem. And regarding the ongoing genocide, they believed, or they've chosen to find policies and practices as ongoing policies and practices since 1967. So in the case of this opinion, they are not talking about Israeli actions post October 7th, 2023, and they're not talking about anything before 1967. So they're leaving up both the Nakba and the current genocide. And I think that's just an important fact to keep in mind as we're going through this, in case you're wondering, hey, but where's, they're doing all this even worse shit now. Why aren't they talking about that? This is why. So this was brought back in 2022. And specifically, it's about the way that the Israeli state administers and uses its powers within the occupied Palestinian territories. So that's including Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. Kieran, do you want to maybe dip a little bit into the history of these territories post 67? If you're able to do that at the drop of a hat. Feel free to go back a bit further if you need to give context, of course.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. I mean, maybe it is worth talking about the Six-Day War because I think that you will still hear Zionists lying about this all the time. One of the great ways of controlling history is to write the textbooks, and so if you want to read about preemptive war, you look up international law textbooks, and you'll find someone like Yoram Dinston writing that preemption can exist, and giving 1967 as an example. But Israel claims they had a legitimate right to wage a preemptive war. Now, preemption means that you are attacking someone before they attack you, but you know very, very certainly that they're definitely going to attack you. Absolutely cross your heart and hope to die, and you definitely wouldn't lie about that at all. So even though Israel was militarily superior to its neighbors, it claimed that they were going to attack imminently. They pretty much destroyed the Egyptian Air Force on the ground and then invaded these territories, Golan Heights and Gaza and part of Egypt in the Sinai Desert, and occupied them, and then said, it's called the Six-Day War because it lasted 6 days. They absolutely were very successful, put it that way, brutally successful. It's a horrific onslaught for the other side, if you want to look at it that way. So very positive if you're a Zionist, not so positive for the others. And so that is how they came to occupy the occupied Palestinian territories. Previously, Gaza had been controlled by Egypt and the West Bank had been controlled by Jordan. That happened in 1948. I think the British plan with the Hashemite dynasty in Jordan was that Jordan would actually annex that territory, and it would, become Jordanian. And I'm not sure what the plan with Gaza was, but some Egyptian generals, including Nasser, who would later become the leader of Egypt, decided that they weren't going to go along with that plan. So, almost like Palestine, I think, was not meant to exist beyond 1948. If that plan had all played out, there would just be, a chunk of Jordan that was on the other side of the Jordan River. Yeah, so they occupied those territories, and then of course, there was over time, Palestinians have been separated more and more from the Palestinians from, we'll call it 67. Palestine separated more and more from the people who live in 48 Palestine, the other part, so Israel, what we call Israel. Then, of course, they started building settlements as well. These settlements are fully government funded. They provide security, they provide subsidies, they build infrastructure. They are a state colonization program. In 2005, they decided to decolonize Gaza, and they took out their settlers from Gaza. I mean, I guess part of the sort of quasi-fascist politics of this sort of thing is that it actually revs up the backlash a lot, and so it kind of fuels settler fervour. And since that time, we've definitely seen a further growing fanaticism within Israel, where they are quite open now that they belong there. Previously a lot of people were, felt that Israeli mainstream politics was different than settler politics, even though their government is, of course, funding it, and it's very much part of their society. They still kept it ideologically separate, but it has become more mainstream now. And so there's about 600,000 settlers in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, something like that.
Yeah,
I think that's about right.
And of course, it is a highly apartheid system with, in order to facilitate, as the ICJ ruling discusses, in order to facilitate the presence of settlers, they restrict the Palestinian residents a great deal, and there is unequal access to all sorts of resources, natural resources, economic resources, and so forth, creating a highly oppressive apartheid system.
I mean, that's one of the less told tragedies of the moment, is the daily pogroms that are going on, the 500 Palestinians who have been killed from the West Bank so far, the thousands imprisoned. But I think that one of the parts of the ruling which I think is incredibly important is the finding that it is apartheid, and that was kind of hammered home by the Israelis themselves when they passed the resolution this week, saying there would be no Palestinian state west of the Jordan. So they are basically admitting their apartheid state, and the world as recognizes them as such. And the other really important thing, I think, is the fact that it's been confirmed that Gaza is occupied. So Israel is carrying out those crimes in Gaza, which it occupies. And at a point where, if we had an Israeli on this program, they would be demanding of us right now. They would say, does Israel have a right to self-defense? And does Israel? And I would say, look, the first responsibility of any government is to protect the lives of the people under its control. So not just if it was New Zealand, the New Zealanders, but anybody else who happened to be in the country at the time. What we've been told is that Israel controls the lives of 7 million Palestinians. They have complete responsibility, in my view, to protect them, not to kill them. And we're now looking at, according to the Lancet, about 200,000 dead already. We're on the verge of famine. We're on the verge of terrible outbreaks of disease. And that's only the beginning, because we've got malnourished children who are never going to recover. We've got children living without parents. It is unbelievable.
Absolutely. As you're saying, we'll get into this in terms of what it means to occupy a territory. Part of that is a duty of care towards the populations that you're occupying. And so this is one of the really incredible things about this advisory opinion, is that basically every piece of Israeli PR that has been run out since October 7th is just in the mud. And that's not to say that it wasn't already, but there are now rulings in the ICJ that they are just absolutely incorrect. And in fact, often the counter is true.
The response, of course, is the same. They're anti-Semites. It's what they said about the International Criminal Court. One of the advisors to the International Criminal Court was Theodore Meron. He literally grew up in a Nazi concentration camp, was an Israeli ambassador and a legal advisor to the Israeli government. The absurd claims that they make constantly that everything is anti-Semitic has to be called out.
Yeah, absolutely. Returning to the document itself, I want to just give the full text of the questions before the court, just for the podcast here. So there are two, A and B. The first is, what are the legal consequences arising from the ongoing violation by Israel of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination from its prolonged occupation, settlement, and annexation of the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including measures aimed at altering the demographic composition, character, and status of the Holy City of Jerusalem, and from its adoption of related discriminatory legislation and measures. And the second is, how do the policies and practices of Israel, referred to in paragraph 18A above, affect the legal status of the occupation, and what are the legal consequences that arise for all states and the United Nations from the status? So essentially asking, what does this mean? What does it mean that Israel has done these things in a legal setting? And what are the consequences of that? And it's not a good result for Israel to speak flippantly. Even before any of this came out, of course, and you've alluded to, Jeremy, there has just been a raft of different attempts and attacks on the court and on the UN and on the ruling itself. The document itself, the opinion itself, goes into detail on a range of these and a range of the ways in which Israel or other states tried to undermine the ability of the court to rule on these questions. For example, they made an argument that the court can't rule because it is a bilateral dispute between Palestine and Israel, and because Israel hasn't consented to the jurisdiction of the court, therefore the court can't rule on it. I think the resolution you brought up earlier, Jeremy, is relevant there, the 77247 resolution, which Israel had voted against previously. They tried to use that as evidence that it also applied here. However, the court decided this just didn't count, that this was not going to be something that stopped them from ruling on it. And basically, and I guess this will come out further in the opinion as well, but because Palestine is occupied, because there are a range of different states that are interested in this decision, that the court felt that they had a role to play in deciding on these arguments. They also said that people trying to stop this decision said that the court should decline to reply to the questions because an advisory opinion from the court would interfere with the Israeli-Palestinian negotiation process laid out by the framework established in the 1993 Declaration of Principles. The court waved us away to say that this hasn't worked. This isn't working since 1993. Nothing is stopping this. Like the court doesn't need to stop this.
Could I just interject and say it has been working? This is exactly what, this is what it's intended to do. And this isn't unprecedented either. In the Korean War, there was a really rather relatively short period of decisive warfare, after which it was just static warfare with the US blocking any possibility of a negotiated solution for years, often to the great despair of their allies, such as the British negotiators, while they committed genocidal aerial campaign against the North, which ended up just killing at least 10% of the population there. And in the Second Indochina War, the American War, or the Vietnam War, depending on which side you're on, they pulled a very similar trick. They wouldn't initially begin negotiations when Lyndon Johnson gave a speech saying, like, the other side, they don't even want to negotiate to us. So the Vietnamese regime responded by saying, well, yes, we do. Here's the conditions we want to negotiate on. And Lyndon Johnson just said, see, I told you they didn't want to negotiate. And there is a lot of echoes of that in the way the tame press talks about Israel-Palestine negotiations, because the onus is always, they're always able to say that the other person doesn't want peace and we're being reasonable. We have no partners for peace. And one of the things about this opinion is that it kind of could put an end to that. In fact, I saw someone on Al Jazeera pointing this out, that we've had ridiculous ideas like land for peace, which are basically saying, give up your rights or we're going to kill you. And then they kill some of them. And then, I mean, the thing is that in the end, it's not even possible for any Palestinian group to give up fundamental rights that are there. They can't, for example, give up the right of return for Palestinian refugees outside of the occupied territories, even though Israel has been demanding that of them many times. And I think that the whole purpose of negotiations of the peace process has been, to facilitate slow genocide, and that's while demonizing the other side as being unwilling to be a peace partner.
As you say, that's come to the fore during the last 10 months as well, as that narrative has become more and more stretched, to the point where in the last few weeks, Hamas has, in principle, agreed multiple times to a ceasefire, and Israel has said, oh no, we're not going to agree to that unless you restart the war in 6 weeks, which completely undermines, it's not a ceasefire anymore in that case. So, essentially the court has taken all that into account and said, this isn't working anyway, so it doesn't, our decision is not going to make a difference in that sense. They've also said the court doesn't have sufficient information. This is another thing that's been said, and it was said about the provisional genocide ruling as well. And they've said, you'd have to do an investigatory period. You need to go and do this and go back and look at the entirety of those decades, all the way back to 1967, and pick through it piece by piece. And the court has said, no, we actually have all that information because it's in other rulings. There's a lot of information out there about this stuff. We can compile it. That shouldn't be a problem. And the last argument made directly to the court is that the questions were formulated in a biased manner, and that they assumed the existence of violations of international law by Israel, and therefore the court should decline to look into these questions that have been put before them. And the court has said that it doesn't matter if they're biased or not, because we're going to look into them and ascertain for ourselves whether or not this is true, or there's bias here, or whether or not the policies and practices are in violation of the rules, bias aside. And also we have the power to reframe the questions if we want to make them less biased. So this is not going to be an issue for us either. So I've gone through a really intensive process of hearing people's concerns, whether in good faith or not, and outlining the reasons why the ICJ does have jurisdiction and is able to hear this case. I've got a huge number of notes here. Essentially, the court then goes through a set of definitions to talk about what is meant by these policies, what period of time they're looking at, and this is where they decide it's from 1967 and does not include October 7th and the genocide. It looks at definitions of things like annexation, definitions of different rights, and lays out the ways in which each of these will be applied or investigated in relation to this issue.
What does it say about Golan Heights?
Not Palestinian territory. So it's not included as part of this. But I think there are things that you can draw from this regarding that as well. And I think it does mention it in several places throughout the ruling. but kind of as an aggregate, not as something that they're ruling on specifically. So we're looking at the material scope of what they're looking at regarding the types of conduct by the Israeli state in regards to question A, which is about the policies and practices. So the first is the ongoing violation by Israel of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. The second is Israel's prolonged occupation, settlement, and annexation of the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including measures aimed at altering the demographic composition, character, and status of the holy city of Jerusalem. And the third is Israel's adoption of related discriminatory legislation and measures. So they're looking at those separately as different groupings.
I'd be keen to talk about what we think New Zealand how we should respond. And I'd start by saying Luxon and most of the leaders before him talk about our commitment to a rules-based order.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about teaming up with like-minded countries. And I would just heartily endorse both of those. I think we absolutely should support a rules-based order. This ruling gives us the chance to do that. And that could well mean in time, probably International Criminal Court rather than this one, but arresting Israelis if they set foot on our territory, and certainly starting to look at sanctions against businesses involved in the territories and so on. I think there's a whole list of things that we could be doing. And on the like-minded countries, I think it's unrealistic to think that there's a team, a select small number of countries that you say we're like-minded with. But I think we should be able to say that we support countries who are against genocide. Now, that would rule us out at the moment, and I think for the foreseeable future, of being in any form of alliance with the United States, with Germany, possibly with the UK still to be decided. And I really think that we need as a country to start having that discussion. Luxon is trying to rush us into AUKUS Pillar 2 without any public consultation. And I think this is a case where we really need wide public consultation. We need to see whether people agree with me that genocide is a bottom line that you don't go past.
Absolutely. And it's something that I'd say the New Zealand government at least responded to over the weekend. They acknowledged that this ruling had been made, which is, not a given. But as we go through some of the things in the document, you'll see why they basically had to, because it is so clear that basically all the arguments that have been made about Israel as a state being a system of apartheid, maybe doing ethnic cleansing, annexing Palestinian land, occupying the territories, and not allowing self-determination of the Palestinian people have been occurring. So in the ruling, or in the opinion, they say that it's premised on the assumption that there is an Israeli occupation. And they specifically mention Gaza, because this, again, has been an ongoing claim by Israel and by Israel's allies that Gaza is no longer occupied because they pulled out settlements and pulled out armed forces. And the ICJ in this opinion has basically ruled that that's not the case.
People have, it's never been really in question by people who understand the law, because they control the airspace, they control the borders. So I think that it's a measure of how obtuse our leaders are, our thought leaders are, when they want to be, that they have pretended that this is somehow at issue. And I'd count journalists, politicians, academics as treating this as if it was a controversy when it's not a controversy. They've always, it's always been understood that they occupy.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. And now we've got an opinion from the ICJ saying the same, and that therefore Israel's obligations towards the occupied party also remain, which Israel has for a long time used to claim that they don't have that obligation. They also make the distinction between the use of language around settlements and outposts, and how those interact with the idea of occupation. So the way that this has tended to present itself in the discourse is that outposts are something kind of set up by rogue settlers against or in contravention of Israeli law, whereas settlements have been within the legal framework. However, they have decided in this opinion that that's not relevant, because the way that Israel treats outposts tends to be the same as they treat settlements, often bringing those outposts back into the legal framework after the fact. And also in material ways, such as providing military and infrastructure support, if not direct funding. A lot of this stuff, they are able to call back to previous rulings and opinions that the court has made. One in particular is in regards to what is called the Wall Advisory Opinion throughout the document, and that relates to the building of the wall around parts of the occupied Palestinian territories, which at the time was deemed illegal, and Israel continued to build it.
And it's not actually around, it's right through. So it takes in large amounts of Palestine and puts it on the Israeli side.
Kieran, do you want to know anything further about that from 04, 05?
I would like to say that, this is not a wall, it's merely a security fence that just happens to be 15 meters high, made of concrete.
Well, this was the argument made at the time, right? Is that they needed to have this to stop incursions from, well, it turns out, parts of Palestine to other parts of Palestine.
Yeah, exactly. They couldn't put it inside their own border, clearly.
So we're referring back to that a lot as well. And other ways in which Israel has not met its obligations under international law as an occupying power. A further note that is made is that and I guess all of these are a part of getting ahead of disagreements with this ruling. So one of the things I've said here is that you do not need to transfer parts of the civilian population of the occupied territory in order for this to be a breach of your obligations toward that population. So an argument often made in Israel is that, oh no, everyone's living there together. They're still allowed to live on their land, and we're not pushing them out. Obviously, this is untrue materially as well, but the court has ruled that even if that were the case, that wouldn't matter in this instance. There's just so much here that you do not regularly encounter when reading or engaging with journalism or even history of the region. And we say it's a big document, but it's so concise. There's just a lot of it. It goes into detail about the exploitation of natural resources and the use of occupation, particularly in Area C, which is the fully Israeli controlled area of the West Bank, for the wealth and benefit of the Israeli state. One of the rules of occupation is that the resources of that territory should be used to benefit the occupied population. This is another breach of international law. The report goes so far to say that Israel even prioritizes the natural resource of water supply for settlements to the detriment of Palestinian communities, which suffer from lengthy and frequent water outages. And Palestinians have to purchase a lot of their water from Israel itself at higher and higher prices. I mean, it's just outrageous. I've been at a loss continually while reading this.
I'm not sure what the situation is now, but for many, many years, the occupation paid more tax than it cost to occupy it. So Israel was actually taxing them more than it cost them to occupy. And you can see, the water is actually probably the most crucial and the one that you can see. I mean, when you travel through the West Bank, you have these green oases, which are the settlements. You have swimming pools, and the Palestinians simply don't have enough water for their agriculture for their daily lives.
Absolutely. And then it goes on further to say that it's the minerals and other extractive resources as well. 86% of it is under the jurisdiction of Israeli settlements. And those settlements do resource extraction like mining and cultivate agricultural land to the detriment of Palestinians as well. So there's just this extensive list of points outlining the ways in which Israel, as the occupying power, is using the resource of these territories, which they're meant to have what's the right word? I guess a governance role of, to negatively impact the Palestinian people.
Occupation is meant to be a temporary thing, and you're supposed to do everything you can to improve the lives, not make them worse. I mean, and we've seen occupations, Berlin, West Germany, Austria. We have examples of recent times of occupations, Vietnam and Cambodia. I think responsible occupations, which they've left, and they've left the countries in a viable state.
I mean, just to mention the sort of elephant in the room, these laws are about military occupations. Military occupations are not meant to last 57 years.
No.
This is, it's obviously, I'm not saying it's not relevant, but we should understand that this is a process that goes far beyond that into ethnic cleansing, and of course that effectively means genocide. So when they do something like and place these people in there, their goal is genocidal. And the same, I think, there's a portion where they're talking about the imposition of the legal, the Israeli law there, and so forth. These are all, if you actually look at what Raphael Lemkin wrote about when he first came up with the concept of genocide, this is exactly what he was talking about, this kind of multi-pronged approach to basically eating away at the self-determination of the indigenous population and replacing them, with settlers en masse or with a colonial system dominated by an imperial centre somewhere else.
Yeah, and this is like everything in this document outlines the way that people have been describing the last 10 months as the last 70 to 80 years, as a slow genocide that's become a fast genocide. So everything that's outlined in here is part of that slow genocide. And when you talk about the imposition of law, it's even worse. That it's not just Israeli law and customs that are being imposed on the Palestinian population. It's Israeli military courts that are being used to dictate and rule Palestinian people, while Israelis in the occupied territories are subject to civil rule, which is just an absolutely absurd and horrific state of affairs.
One which the Germans used during World War II a lot.
Even as we're getting into like those discussions around occupation, this is why, or part of why the ICJ wanted to discuss annexation as well. Because as you've said, an occupation is not meant to last 57 years. It's not really an occupation anymore. And what the opinion goes on to claim is that this is an annexation. This is not merely occupation. These are occupied territories for the purpose of annexing Palestinian land and resources.
Like I said, Israel has confirmed that with that resolution. I mean, they're very clear. This is not occupation. This is permanent. And so what we have is either a permanent apartheid state, which seems to be what they're saying, with, as you say, continuing ethnic cleansing, or, which is the outcome which I think the court is suggesting, an immediate two-state solution with 22% of historic Palestine being turned into a Palestinian state. Now, most of us believe that that ship has well and truly sailed, but, maybe that is, that's what New Zealand and other countries are committed to. if they're serious about being committed to it, then all out pressure should go on. Of course, as I've said, the problem is the USA, and the only solution to that is the American street. You know, we often talk about the Arab street, but it's the American street that needs to come out, and they are coming out, including the Jewish community, you know, a minority, I'm sure, but a significant one. And that, I think, for me, is the only hope. But it feels, you know, it's going to be too little too late.
Yeah, I mean, it already is, right?
Yeah.
In many ways that matter. And you've spoken about this previously on the podcast when we did the other ICJ advisory opinion, Kieran, around, you know, things that cannot be undone.
I don't believe, though, that it's we need to accept that the Israeli settlers in 67 Palestine have to stay there. That somehow their presence is too. Well, this is what I said before. It was, you know, I think it's a foolish argument to say that we have to avoid inflicting some sort of pain on them when their presence is an ongoing source of pain for other people. And, you know, if you're going to make some sort of utilitarian argument that they need to stay because it's too horrible to do this to them, then I think you need to really look at exactly what the impact of them staying is on other people. Right. So, yeah, it's not out of any concern for the rights of the poor benighted settlers that that I don't believe in a two-state solution. But at the same time, you know, talking about New Zealand, I think that, you know, difficult to understand how they justify not recognising the state of Palestine is a matter of when and not if. It is a confession that this is not a matter of conscience. It's purely it's a matter of politics, which would be about pleasing the imperial masters and so forth. Because if something is right, there is no reason for delaying it. So, yeah.
Especially in the face of what we mentioned earlier, which is Israel has now voted against ever recognizing a two-state solution.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So you have to respond to that if you're going to be taken seriously.
He could also be playing to some of his voters. I mean, I think he's probably got Christian Zionists among the NZ First voting group.
He absolutely does. He's been visiting with Zionists for 10 months, which, you know, isn't great. Back to the document. Essentially, based on the entirety, all those ways in which Israel is failing to meet its obligations as an occupying power, the court reaffirms that the settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the regime associated with them are being maintained in violation of international law. And it's incredible to have that just as a, you know, it's here as a single sentence in a ICJ opinion, you know, that now exists. And, you know, I think we mentioned it at the beginning of the podcast, that's now something that can be leveraged. You know, that is something which, you know, we've had boycott and sanction actions against settlements in the past. And this gives those, not greater moral weight, because they always had that, but something else to point to and say, that one's coming down the line for you later on. Probably don't want your business to be involved with illegal entities that are violating international law that could cause you some problems in the future. Better divest from those now.
It probably goes well beyond just businesses inside the occupied territories. If the government is found to be in flagrant violation of international law, then surely you start to take actions against the government. And
Absolutely.
And I would have thought that sanctions against Israel are on the table now.
I would hope so. I also think that there's an even more direct thing in that we're signatory to the Anti-Apartheid Convention. So, like the Genocide Convention, which they are at the moment happily ignoring, it does leave them open to legal challenges as well. Absolutely, because they are obliged to take action.
The court goes on from there and starts to look at this idea that is not just occupation, it's annexation. So that is they've stolen the land, essentially. They've gone and the state of Israel has stolen the land from the state of Palestine. One of the major examples being used for this, of course, is the construction of the wall in the West Bank, but also the establishment of settlements and outposts and the connection of those to the Israeli state via public transport infrastructure, as well as energy and public service infrastructure that is needed to maintain those. It's very hard to argue that a state paying for and helping to construct those functions within a settlement are anything but annexation of the land that those settlements are on, because it's tying them directly to the home state.
And also the nature of them is clearly apartheid as well, in that the actual policy in Hebrew apparently is called separateness, which is, of course, Afrikaan. Yeah. So, they're building an infrastructure where they've got different roads and so forth. So,
well, and this is part of the thing, and the court mentioned this as well. It says, because Israel treats East Jerusalem as its own territory, it regards Palestinians residing there as foreigners and requires them to hold valid residence permits. They've also put in place a building permit scheme, the violation of which results in demolition through a sped up procedure, kind of like the fast track bill here in New Zealand, as well as fines. In 2019, so 5 years ago, an investigation found that at least 1/3 of all Palestinian homes lacked an Israeli permit, which meant over 100,000 residents were at risk of having their homes demolished with no recourse. And this is just hanging over Palestinians' heads in these parts of the occupied territories constantly. There's no way to, when you have such a clear separation of rights, there's no way to really talk about it except as apartheid. And annexation follows on from that, where Palestinians are seen as foreigners on their own land.
Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Andrew Feinstein, who just stood in the British election, all of them, all experts in apartheid, victims of apartheid, they've all described it as apartheid. For years it's been very clear that that's what it is. The only difference, according to Desmond Tutu, is that it's much worse.
Yeah, and again, these are things that everyone knows. Where anyone who's been in the space or engaging with this at all knows this to be the case. As you implied or outright said, Kieran, Israel knows this is the case as well. This is the intent. This is how it's designed. But now it's in an ICJ opinion. They also observe that the continued expansion of settlements in Area C increases Israel's civilian and military presence in the territory and pushes the Palestinian population to other areas of the West Bank. And this is where we come to the implication of ethnic cleansing. I don't think they say it outright within this document. They're using this as an argument for why they believe annexation is occurring. A set of the Israeli state is being expanded alongside its infrastructure, and the Palestinian people are being pushed out, and therefore they're calling it annexation. But remember, we're seeing this happen over, in the case of this document, 57 years. This is very clearly a set of policies and strategies to ethnically cleanse the occupied territories, in my opinion. And I think that this ICJ opinion will absolutely be used as a way to back up further rulings in regards to that. They say that the displacement of the local population also advances the integration of the territory with the rest of the Israeli state. Israel's policies and practices induce the departure of the Palestinian population from parts of the occupied territory, and this in turn enables the further expansion of Israel's settlement policy and the ready integration of Palestinian territory into Israel. Again, this is by design, and I don't think you can actually make an argument that you are annexing a territory without ethnically cleansing it. I think that would be pretty difficult to do.
Look, I do think that Israel, and it's far from an original thought, but it is a settler colonial state, and it's a long tradition, and we also live in a settler colonial state. Isaac Deutscher, the Marxist historian, used the metaphor of a man in a burning building. He jumps out the window and he lands on a passerby, and then he gets up and he starts kicking the person who broke his fall. That was his kind of portrayal of how Israel came about. So for me, the tragedy of Europe did lead to the creation of Israel, but Israel was a colonial project. So, and it's a very typical one, and I think it should be seen in that light. And like other colonial societies, I don't think it's going anywhere. There needs to be a change. It's got to stop being an apartheid state. It's got a choice on its hands. Either it becomes a country of all its citizens equal, or, and whether it would work, I'm not sure, it abides by this ruling and creates a state within historic, the 22%. So a very unjust solution with Palestinians. The Palestinians within Israel are by far the best off, and the world could make a huge difference by pumping resources in. But there's nothing on the horizon that makes me think any of that's going to happen. It's a very grim time. And the immediate thing for me is that the world has to stop the genocide, the active genocide, and not take our eyes off the pogroms and what you called the slow genocide that's taking place in the West Bank.
Yeah, I think one of the things from Israel's perspective is that they're probably very well aware that any move towards a two-state solution is not going to end the questions of the right of return for refugees in 1967, Palestine, and the diaspora as well. And so those people who are trapped in that 22%, they still have a legal right, as well as people outside of Israel, Palestine altogether, still have a right to either be able to come back to where they came from or to be given compensation for that. So I think...
I absolutely agree with that. I do think it's worth remembering the millions and millions of Greeks who were ethnically cleansed from Turkey, the Turks who were ethnically cleansed from Greece, the Pakistanis, the Bangladeshis. These things do happen. And
this is true, but this all happened...
it's not always reversible.
Yeah, in this case, though, we have all the records. We have the law was very clear, even though the Refugee Convention wasn't ratified until after these events. The fact is that the legal status is quite clear, whereas those other things happened in a time when that legality wasn't in place. So this is a reality that isn't going to go away without rewriting large chunks of international humanitarian law. So again, I think this is why Israel doesn't try to seek some sort of solution, because it isn't going to end claims against them. In fact, it will just for example, this ruling, it deals with a chunk. Then we've got the genocide case. We've had the wall case. It will keep going. People will keep bringing these claims.
Oh, definitely.
So I think that, how much suffering has to happen before we get there, I don't know, but it will have to be a one-state solution in the end.
Yeah, I think that is probably right. Noam Chomsky, who grew up in the binational cultural Zionist movement, so was a huge fan of the idea of a binational state. As you'll know, he became one of the most outspoken critics of people arguing for a one-state solution. And it wasn't because he didn't believe in it, but he said they are living in the illusion that the choice is one state or two states. It's one state or genocide. I don't think he used the word genocide, but that's what he is warning against. And unfortunately, I think he's kind of been proved right. I disagreed with him and felt that that two states were the thing. And he really was committed. There's a fantastic book by Meron Benevisti, who was a Hebrew geographer, that argued for the two-state solution. Now, I didn't even know about that book because Chomsky wrote me a letter in response to something I'd asked him and mentioned it. So he really was committed. I'm talking in the past tense. He is committed to that idea, but thought it was unrealistic. And I think there is this terrible dilemma that you have this, I won't call it a wounded tiger, but you have this society that is in a state of righteous kind of frenzy. It's in shock. 150,000 have left the country. 1 in 4 is talking about leaving. And you have this almost universal commitment and support for what's happening in Gaza. So it's a society, in my view, that's gone mad, a nuclear armed society that's gone mad. And I keep coming back to, I mean, America could stop it almost overnight. If America stopped supporting them, it would change. They've got a green light for America. And like I said, the only hope I have is that those protests get a lot bigger.
Do we think that, and this is one of the challenges, right? When a ruling like this is made, how much of this gets out to the wider public? Like we're saying, like, okay, like different activist actions and the like can draw on this now. It can add weight to what they're doing, legal as well as moral. But how much of that gets out to the wider public, who we need to be putting pressure on people, on politicians, especially in the United States, to actually take action here. And we'll get through a bit more of the document.
Oh, could I just say one thing about the general public though? One of the types of activists that this empowers is media activists. So when the media are forced to refer to apartheid and occupation constantly and not get whitewashed over it, then that will get to the public.
Yeah, actually, that's a really key point. Thanks for that, Kieran, because one of the arguments I've constantly been having over the last 10 months is, oh, you can't use that word because the ICJ or no one's ruled on it yet. No, I'm very comfortable using the word genocide here. I'm very comfortable using the term ethnic cleansing or apartheid. They are definitions that apply here. But I have been told again and again, oh, but we haven't got it on record anywhere.
We have many, many leading experts.
Oh,
in
absolutely.
Genocide, most of them Jewish, who have declared it to be a genocide.
Yeah, we do.
I mean, we had lots of genocide experts who like, obviously a lot of Jewish people are in the field. It's part of the nature of it because of the interest in the Shoah and so forth. But it's not new for genocide experts to be calling it genocide. It's just that some of these more prominent Holocaust scholars now do.
Yeah.
Maybe get a disproportionate amount of coverage, I'd have to say. No,
you're right.
It is significant that often these are people that are Israelis, they're Zionists, and they still call it genocide. I mean, it tells you something.
Yeah. And again, now we have more reason for people to be using language that suits.
Yes.
After this advisory opinion. So on the case of annexation, to come back around, they basically take everything we've just talked about and said, in light of all of this, these policies and practices are designed to remain in place indefinitely and to create irreversible effects on the ground, and that the court considers that they amount to annexation of large parts of the occupied Palestinian territory. Another really important statement to have on paper.
Facts on the ground is an old Israeli saying for exactly that their policy has always been facts on the ground. You take a bit more. And that's right from partition. So when Ben-Gurion accepts partition, he's writing to his son Amos, this is just the beginning. We will take more. So yeah, that's been the policy all along, and a suicidal one in the end.
They can go on to look at the acquisition of territory by force, obviously happening. The question of discriminatory legislation and measures, obviously also occurring in the occupied Palestinian territories. All of these things are illegal under international law. As an occupying power, you're not allowed to do these things. I think it's also worth noting that everything that's been happening in the last 10 months has been in the context of this ruling also coming down the line. So this has been swiftly approaching since the end of 2022. And you have to ask, how much is the Israeli state trying to basically just do as much atrocity as possible before these kind of things stack up?
I think it's important to realize, Israel loves to say it's the only democracy in the Middle East. And it's obviously ridiculous, but there is an element of truth to it. And I read recently that Adam Smith compared the British treatment of slaves to the French treatment of slaves. And he claimed that the British treatment was a lot worse because it was a democracy in the sense that there were competing slave-owning interests that the politicians wanted to deliver to. Now, it's hard to believe anyone was worse than the French in Haiti, but that's what he was claiming. There's something very similar in Israel. You have competition between different fanatic right-wing groups. So it's not a one coherent Israeli state wants to do this. You have competing interests, and there's value to them in being seen to be the most vicious, the most heartless in Gaza. So there is a competition going on, I think, between some of the very worst people you can imagine.
The market of fascist ideas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, every society has like its pieties where you just get to shout the thing that everyone's supposed to agree with, support the troops or whatever. And you shut down the opposition, and you can, these are no limit ideas. I've called them thought-ending pieties, like Robert J. Lifton's thought-ending cliches. The difference is that when a country goes to the extremes that Israel is going to now, they pile up one upon the other upon the other. And this is part of the fascist narrative that you create all of these thought-ending pieties and you yell down anyone who disagrees with any of them. And you can look at the current Republican Party in the US and see a lot of that as well.
And you're literally imprison them. I mean, there's a school teacher in Israel who wrote about the children of Gaza. He spent nights in prison. The situation for Israeli Palestinians is far, far worse. They can wear the wrong badge or do something and lose their job. There's a complete intolerance for dissent. There's a bill going before the Knesset, sponsored originally by students, saying that any faculty professor who says anything that supports terrorism, and God knows what that means, should be sacked. That's students. The very people you'd think were in support of freedom of speech and hopefully concerned about the likes of genocide are the ones who are sponsoring it. It is a truly horrific time in Israel.
And that speaks to the wider, another one of the issues that the court was looking at, which is discriminatory legislation and measures. And this is another one of those things which is the heart of an apartheid state. You have separate rules for different groups, whatever those two groups might be. And it was looking at stuff like residential permits, which we mentioned earlier, where you're allowed to build, where you're allowed to move, freedom of movement, what courts you are tried by. And the court found once again, this differentiation of treatment cannot be justified with reference to reasonable and objective criteria, nor to a legitimate public aim. Accordingly, the court is of the view that the regime of comprehensive restrictions imposed by Israel on Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory constitutes systemic discrimination based on inter alia, race, religion, or ethnic origin, in violation of articles, yada, 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 yada. A whole range of international laws. And again, I'd say something like everyone should read this document. If you're serious about this discourse, and if you're a journalist or if you're a politician and you're serious about this, this is required reading. I'm not going to say everyone should read it because it's very hefty, and I don't expect everyone to have the time to do that or the energy. But everything is here, and it refers there's even so much more reading you could be doing if you just follow all the references to other rulings, and it paints this history since 67 up till today of just how bad the shit is.
Just in case you're putting people off too much, it's pretty dense, but it is actually, it's only concise. 20 pages long. It's very concise. There's just a lot in it.
You're talking about the executive summary.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Are you?
I'm reading the 83 pages.
Oh, okay. No, I don't even have that. Sorry. Okay. Okay. You are dedicated. Yeah.
I am required to be as someone facilitating these conversations and trying to
I see.
present this stuff in the New Zealand information space because there's so little of it happening. I I feel the need to at least make sure someone is.
Oh, well, could I recommend the executive summary to people? Good
idea.
It covers the same ground.
Chris Hipkins put out a statement, didn't he?
I have not seen anything Chris Hipkins has said for 3 months.
Yep, no, he put out a statement. I have to admit I didn't read the whole thing, but basically saying the government had to act on it. He didn't mention that when Labour was in government, that it abstained on the vote that took it to the ICJ, but we can let him pass on that. So there is some, I think the Labour Party in opposition has been speaking out. The Greens, of course, do, and Te Pāti Māori.
Yeah, there's what's really frustrating is that there's so little outcry, even in that electoral space, when there's a huge proportion of New Zealanders who are very much, who first believe it's the genocide, and second, who would support a significant change in policy around it. Anyone
like me who kind of grew up in the shadow of the Holocaust, the question when you're a kid is, how did people let it happen? And, that's a complicated story, and people did know. When they say they didn't know, it's not true, and they could have done more. But it was nothing like now. I mean, now you can click on social media, you can go to Al Jazeera, and you can see it in real time. And there is an outcry, and I think the world is responding really well if you talk about citizens, not governments. And if you talk about the South, governments, they're also doing quite well. The other point I would make is just for Jewish people like me, my grandmother, and she was like every other Jewish grandmother who went through it, she said never again. And I think the great divide amongst the Jewish community now is those of us who assumed that never again meant never again to anybody, and those who believe it means never again to Jews. And that, I think, is a really important divide, and it's not just Jews who are in that category. The Germans are like that. The Americans are like that. The Germans, I think, and the Israelis with this whole Judeo-Christian philosophy believe it's never again to Jews or Europeans. And that's probably what American Christians believe too. But, they are just out and out racist. Anyone who believes that never again means never again for X and Y are despicable.
Yeah, I've it seems like something that should be a given, right?
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, that is not the world we currently live in. I want to speed us up because I realize that I've kept us here for a long time already. The document refers back to everything that we've covered so far in relation to self-determination. So this is the right of Palestinian people to decide their own fates, essentially, and finds that Israel is in violation of that right as well. There is no point in this document where the ICJ lets Israel off the hook. There is so much there just laid out in front of anyone reading it. You cannot read this honestly, and there are going to be a lot of people reading in bad faith, but you cannot read it in good faith and not understand the injustice of what Israel's project is here. And I guess that brings us to the rulings. So what the ICJ said should happen. Kieran, did you want to take us through that?
I just want to say that this whole case is kind of a demonstration that in order to get something done when you're opposing the forces of empire, you have to argue the case 100 times as strongly as you should need to, and for about 10 times as long, And you're quite right to point to the fact that they didn't leave the traditional loophole for Israel, which means, because this is what's been going on for such a long time, is that they, in order to appear even-handed or less anti-Semitic or whatever, or just to show that they're willing to reach out, they always leave that escape clause. They both sides things and so forth, So they're doing the right thing. It takes time, but people are doing the right thing. And so basically, and the other thing is that, of course, none of this is new. None of this is not been known. It's just that it needed to be said. So basically, like, Israel is pretty much ordered to leave immediately and end the occupation. That's it. So again, that goes back to that whole thing. They can no longer say that they're negotiating or that, etc. They can't go to that. So they are suggesting for other states that the Security Council and the General Assembly need to work out how they're going to deal with this. I don't think they mention particularly the Apartheid Convention. So that would be the part that I think would, on an individual state level, I'd imagine this has a bearing on that. But, so how this is going to play out in individual states, of course, they can't just say, it says, in the executive summary, my shortened version that I've got here, it is for all states, while respecting the Charter of the United Nations and international law, to ensure that any impediment resulting from the illegal presence of Israel in the OPT to the exercise of the Palestinian people to its right of self-determination is brought to an end. So they can't say how people have to do that, but they say they have to do that. And I think that, we need to get to the point. I mean, we've seen since this horrific slaughter in Gaza began, we've seen that leaders in the West fear opposing genocide more than they fear supporting genocide. They seem to believe there are no consequences for supporting genocide, and we do need to flip that. We need to flip supporting apartheid. We need to flip supporting occupation. We need to actually make it so that leaders start to realize, oh, wait a second, this could actually be bad for me. So this is, what we have to build on here.
Oh, sorry, I'll just go. I think we need to speak to like-minded nations. So we need to speak to South Africa, we need to speak to Ireland, we need to speak to Spain, and we get a group of countries and we agree on the approach. And that's what Luxon claims to believe in. Like-minded countries, shared values. That's what we've got to do. And it shouldn't be difficult. We can see the countries that have accepted and condemned Israel's the genocide, and we should be teaming up with them and acting in good faith and in the knowledge that if there is a future for Israel and for Palestine, it needs to be forced on them. It needs to be forced on Israel. And there are countries who are much clearer than we are, and we could learn from them. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. As you mentioned before, the Global South, we shouldn't forget them in their huge numbers. Yeah, they don't have the presence, but that's not their fault, and they certainly are more committed to this than Western countries.
Yeah.
And they're offering a moral example. If you look at Vanuatu, they're taking a case to the International Court of Justice at the moment on climate change. They've led the way on lots of these types of issues. We should be teaming up with countries like that as well.
Yeah, we're far from being the leaders we like to think of ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
There's also this really clear disconnect. We're talking about like-minded countries or whatever. What they tend to remember is like-minded governments. And the governments in some Western nations are very far through from what their electorates believe.
Absolutely.
At this point. And that's worrying for democracy. It's not something that we like to see. One of the really interesting things as well in regards to, Israel required to leave is that they're also required to give restitution. So that's obligation to return land, other property, seize resources, assets and cultural property from Palestinian institutions.
That's limited to the 67 lands that were occupied. So there's nothing about it.
It's still within that time frame, unfortunately. And then if it's impossible, if it's materially impossible, if they've destroyed some of that stuff, which they often do, then Israel has an obligation to compensate in accordance with applicable rules of international law for any form of material damage suffered. It's really something. And I said there are a number of implications throughout this as well that are now on paper. One of those was around annexation and ethnic cleansing, but another one is this argument around the right to self-defense and the right to resist. as members of an occupied territory. And it's going to be very, very difficult to make some of those claims in international courts with this document out there now, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be a little bit of a consciousness change to understand that. Going back again to this, people watching too many cop shows. The idea that if you wear a uniform and you've got a bunch of judges and so forth, that is the law. Because I think that Israel does play on that. They seem more like the authority figure, and they have created this picture of Palestinians as the criminals, the disobeyers of the law. When they're actually occupying force, they are, the malefactors or whatever in this case. And, it also emphasised that this court isn't creating the law. This has always been the case. It's just the first time after all this time that anyone has managed to get this actually looked at and properly ruled on. That's the way things work, sadly. So with any luck, this is, this will change matters. I mean, we've always got this language around binding and non-binding and all of that sort of thing as well, which is basically like simply a way of expressing who has power and who doesn't. Like, it really doesn't, is not as people talk like it as if it's a much more formal thing than it is. And the ICJ, its rulings are like, definitely in at least one sense, they are binding. They are like, you can't call them non-binding as people have.
An advisory opinion.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, but it's not like, but it's not, it's not ordering, nor do they have the power to order like all these these states that aren't party to this to do something, but it's setting up that.
If we go back to that resolution sponsored by New Zealand under a national government, 2334, flagrant violation of international law. Now that is binding, and that was passed, and New Zealand should be very proud that we were part of it, even though most politicians backed away very quickly. But we've got a story we can tell that says, look, we have supported, we pointed out that it's a flagrant violation, and this confirms it. And we could make this a moment like our anti-French testing, like the anti-nuclear movement, like our opposition to the fascist invasion of Abyssinia. There's not many of those things, but there's a few that we can stand tall and say we really supported international law when others didn't. And this is a great chance, and National should grab it. I mean, that's their legacy. They've actually managed to get something through the Security Council that was really important, like this ruling. So, if there's any national MPs who listen to this podcast, I'm sure there's dozens.
I know you're out there.
Please lead the way.
National MPs need to listen to us to understand what's coming next in New Zealand politics, because we're the only analysts out there who are getting it right consistently. No, but you're right. Like, it doesn't look, even if it's just for ego, like just get in. It's going to happen anyway, with or without you. Like, this is coming. Don't be on the wrong side of it.
All indications are that we're heading to being completely on the wrong side of it, I think. But we'll see. I mean, having said that, they haven't been completely on the wrong side of this issue. They haven't been as forceful as I'd like, but they have criticised Israel.
No, and like, I think it's in large part due to people mobilising on the ground. People have made their voices heard loud enough that the government knows that they can't be as pro-Israel as they'd like to be, which is not nothing.
Don't forget as well that, of course, we are like Netanyahu did tell Murray McCully that this was all a declaration of war. So we have had war with Israel for the last 8 years anyway. So I don't know why they don't lean into that a little bit.
We can only hope. We can only hope. we should probably wrap it up. But thank you so much for joining me, Jeremy.
Thanks very much.
And Kieran, thanks for coming back.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no worries.
Well, that's been another episode. We did rush a little at the end there. Next time I do one of these, I will maybe try and script it a bit more so that we have a very clear 3 hours of to go over this in a really structured way. But hopefully we're able to reveal or help our listeners to understand some of the things that were included in this advisory opinion from the ICJ. And some of the possible implications of that, including in regards to the New Zealand political situation. So do share this. Let people know that there are some media in New Zealand that are covering what's happening in the occupied territories in Palestine, as well as in Gaza in the current day. There is information out there. There are people talking about it. There are people on the right side of this. And yeah, I guess we just all keep at it until justice is served. We'll catch you on the weekend for our regular current events. That's been another episode of 10200.
If artificers are then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's apart now. It's paid with good intentions. And I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they criticism cost me ought to stay. Cause I live amongst the people every day. And this vindictive, forgetful